Welcome back to the React programming series from ground up. This video, we are going to see how to make API calls to fetch data from a remote resource server. We shall be using fetch and Axios to make these APIs calls and to fetch the data from the remote resource server. Let's get started. Let's start with some key terms. First thing in programming is asynchronous versus synchronous. Synchronous is when the function completes and then only the second function can start. So in our execution, unless the first statement is done or the first function call is completed, the second function call does not execute. So which will mean that there is no parallelism. Everything is done serially. First completion of one function, then second function start, it completes, then third function starts and completes. That is asynchronous. In asynchronous programming, you shall be able to execute multiple tasks at the same time and they shall be running parallelly. This is why this is significant. We are going to see in a bit. If you execute this program, you shall see that this is printed first and then this is printed. Post this, only this is printed. Why so is because it's a asynchronous call. So it tries to fetch some data from this API or this URL and post the fetch of this data, this call runs because it's a asynchronous. So unless and until this fetch has been done, and fetch is done from a remote server, so it is little bit latency is there in fetching the data from the remote server. So that's why there is a delay, and thereby this this call is made much before this call is made because it is made only on the completion of the fetch call. So this is basically an example of asynchronous calls. In promises, dot then is used to register callbacks to be executed when a promise settles, either resolves or rejects. You can use it to define what should happen after the promise completes. So here what you have defined is a callback. So once this function is completed, this fetch call is completed, this specific callback is executed. Await. Now, when you have a synchronous function, you can make it behave like a synchronous function by using await. So if I have await here, let's say this is a asynchronous function. If I have put a wait here, the function call will stop here. The function call will stop here till it gets the result of this function call. So await is used inside a async function and allows you to pause the execution of that function until the awaited promise is resolved. So basically it is keep on waiting here till this is complete. And what is the implication of this? It's a more synchronous like way to work with asynchronous code. So we have made it a synchronous. So unless this is complete, we will not be executing this statement. So we have made the asynchronous function synchronous by using await. Map, this we have discussed it earlier also. This map is basically used with a array. So this data is a array here, and it is used to iterate over each element in the array and perform an operation on each element. So basically here this array is data and we are running a map function here, and what it does is for each element it multiplies it by 2 and finally the output shall be this, wherein everything is multiplied by 2. 1 become a 2, 2 become a 4, 5 become a 10. So that's what has happened here. Now let's go to the core of this video, fetch and Axios. So these are the two ways in which you can make the API calls. There are multiple other ways also, but primarily we use either fetch or Axios. So fetch is built-in function, which means you don't have to install any library to use the fetch. And fetch and Axios both are promise based. This is also promise based. This is also promise based. And what is a promise? We saw that it gives you the feasibility of putting a callback function which execute when the specific method, asynchronous method is completed. Axios is simple to use. It has the provision to use interceptors and it has the provision to cancel request as well. So thereby it is more powerful than fetch. And what about the cons of both the things? So in fetch, you don't have automatic JSON parsing. That's a cons for fetch. In Axios, the cons is that you have to have the dependency installed. So you cannot use Axios directly. You have to have the dependency installed before you can use the Axios. And this is the dependency which you have to install. So I have opened the project in Visual Studio Code, and this is the same project as chapter 8. The only differences which I have done, I'm going to show you those differences. So we had some components which we have defined earlier. I have made some modifications on those components. So the first thing is fetch. So fetch is the first thing. So what I have done is I have given example of how to use fetch. So we have use state and use effect, and we know why these hooks are used. We have already discussed this in the beginning. So I'm not going to discuss it here. What is happening here is you make this call, and this is basically a asynchronous call, and then you have used await. You have used await, so thereby it has become a synchronous call. So when it is done, the response is fed into this data object, and the set data and set loading is made to false, and the same data which is fetched there, it is iterated here and it is shown you on the screen. When I run this program, this will become aptly clear what exactly we are doing. So this is the example of fetch. Similarly, the same thing has been achieved using the Axios. So Axios.get is what is being done here, and same code, exactly the same code base is written here to fetch the data. So you can see the similarity between how we call Axios vis-a-vis how we call a fetch. The last thing which I want to show you is how to do a post call in Axios. So this is where we are doing a post call. So we are defining title, body, and user ID. And those three items are what we are filling inside our form. So in the form, we have those title, and we have the body, and we have the user ID. And when we change it, we call this handle change event handler. So on the submission, on submit, what happens is when you submit this, this is handle submit, and on handle submit, which is here on the form tag, we have a handle submit. On submit, we make this change, and on change of these things, we have the value updated. We have the handle change, and handle change will append the proper value here with the form data. Okay, so that's what happens. The last value get appended here, the state gets modified, and finally you make this call, and your post call is complete. Let's see this in action now. This is the post call. We'll see it in a bit. This is using fetch. We have fetched the data from the remote API. The same thing being done with the Axios, same code base we used. And the last thing is this. So title is my post example. Body is blog post, anything. And user ID is a numeric. So we have to select, let me say user ID 5, and I submit, and this post request is submitted to my resource server. So the last thing which I want to show you is that I should be able to run this from the console also, meaning there is no library which is required for using the fetch call. Let's see how. So you saw that I'm able to make this call without having anything. And if you see here, all these things are the same thing which are being represented in the about and contact also. So 200 items are there and they are represented here. So you would be able to see the same thing. Delectus autumn, same thing with the user ID 1, and subsequently the same results. So we could see that we are able to use fetch in the console, which means without loading any library. This concludes the demo. Thank you very much.